When King Henry VIII entered his final years, England trembled not from war, but from him. His body was rotting alive. His legs oozed pus, his breath stank of decay, and servants fainted just being near him. This was the man who broke England from Rome, executed 2 wives, and rewrote history. Now, the king who once terrified a nation couldn't even stand. He screamed at invisible enemies at night, and the walls of Hampton Court shook with the sound of a dying god. By 1546, Henry was no longer the powerful monarch in shining armor. He was a swollen, monstrous man of nearly 400 pounds. His legs were split open with ulcers so deep that maggots fed inside them. Every step was agony. The once feared king had to be carried by his servants on a stretcher, and sometimes they gagged from the smell. Doctors burned his wounds with boiling oil, and he screamed for hours. But he wouldn't let anyone say he was dying. "I am England," he roared. "England does not die." The pain made him crueler than ever. He accused loyal courtiers of treason just for whispering. One slip of the tongue could mean execution. At night, he hallucinated seeing Anne Boleyn's headless body crawling toward his bed. Sometimes he shouted her name. Other times he ordered guards to cut her down again. Everyone feared him, even his doctors. When one dared suggest he confess his sins, Henry had him dragged away and never seen again. The once brilliant ruler had turned into a paranoid monster, drowning in his own guilt. His last wife, Catherine Parr, became more nurse than queen. She cleaned his infected wounds, changed his bloody sheets, and listened to his rants about betrayal. Some nights she prayed for him, other nights she prayed for herself. She knew he'd executed wives for less. "Do you still love me, Kate?" he would growl through his rotten teeth. She smiled and lied. Henry would grab her hand, blood seeping from under his bandages, whispering, "You'll join them if you lie." And still, she smiled. Because queens didn't live by truth, they survived by fear. The royal court turned into a silent nightmare. No one dared speak above a whisper. Servants moved like ghosts, terrified to make noise that might anger him. His throne room smelled of rot and vinegar. Henry signed death warrants while his hand trembled from pain. Once, his ulcer burst during a meeting, spraying pus on a courtier's clothes. The man tried not to scream and was rewarded with a smile from the king. "A brave one," Henry said. "Not everyone can stomach my rule." The laughter that followed was worse than the pain. By winter, Henry could barely move. His once mighty frame was collapsing in on itself. They built him a mechanical chair with gears and levers, so he could be lifted to his meals like a grotesque puppet. Food meant nothing to him now. He stuffed his mouth with meat but spat most of it out. He couldn't taste, couldn't breathe, couldn't stand. When the chair jammed, he screamed that God himself was betraying him. "Fix it!" he shouted. "I am still king!" But the machine groaned, and the king looked more like a corpse than a man. Catherine Parr tried to keep the court from falling apart, but whispers filled every hallway. Some said the king's soul was already gone. Priests refused to hear his confessions. They feared his wrath. He ordered constant music in his chambers to drown out the screams of his own pain. Yet at night, even with the lutes playing, people heard him cry out for God to forgive him. "Anne, Jane, Father," he muttered, naming wives and victims alike. The man who executed monks now begged for their prayers, but none would come. The smell of death filled Hampton Court. Guards rotated every few hours because none could stand the stench for long. His bedsheets were burned daily. Worms appeared in the straw beneath his mattress. When doctors lanced his ulcers, the fluid splattered on the floor black and thick. One servant wrote later that the king's flesh did melt like wax. Rumors spread that his rotting body was proof of divine punishment. The church called it God's justice for his pride. Even his closest advisors stopped touching his hand. As death crept closer, his mind unraveled completely. He ordered the execution of men who had already been dead for years. He shouted at invisible soldiers, demanding they kneel. "The traitors are still among us," he roared, spittle flying. At times, he fell silent for hours, staring at the wall where no one stood. When a priest finally dared approach, Henry whispered, "I see them." All of them, the priest asked. Who, Your Majesty? The king smiled. Everyone I killed. And then he began to laugh. A deep, broken sound that chilled the blood. No one dared speak of it aloud, but everyone knew the truth. The king was dying, and hell was waiting. His doctors lied to his face, saying he was recovering, while secretly preparing the burial clothes. When the pain became unbearable, Henry begged for opium and wine mixed together. He'd pass out, wake up screaming, then drink again. Each morning his lips were purple, his hands shaking, his crown lying crooked on his head. The man who had murdered his faith now begged for mercy from the God he had destroyed. The 27th of January, 1547. The king's final night. His breath came in ragged bursts, the air thick with the smell of rotting meat. Catherine Parr prayed beside him, whispering psalms he no longer heard. Is it time? One servant asked. The doctor nodded. As the candles flickered, Henry's chest rose once more, then stopped. Silence filled the chamber. No trumpets, no royal dignity, just a gurgling sound from his throat, as if even death hesitated to touch him. England's most terrifying monarch died alone, drowning in his own decay. But the horror didn't end with his death. His corpse swelled grotesquely within hours. The heat of the room made the gases build up until the coffin began to bulge. By morning, the lid had cracked. Guards whispered that his body groaned like a beast. When they finally sealed it with lead, they used spices to mask the smell, but nothing helped. The stench seeped through the palace. Some swore they heard scratching from inside the coffin. Whether rats or damnation, no one dared check. During the slow journey to Windsor, the coffin rested overnight in Sion Abbey. That's when the nightmare reached legend. Witnesses later said the coffin split again, and thick, dark liquid dripped onto the church floor. A stray dog wandered in and began licking it. Priests froze. One whispered, "The hound of hell drinks the blood of the king." The story spread like wildfire. To the people, it was a sign. Even in death, Henry VIII was being claimed by the devil he had served in life. When they finally buried him in St. George's Chapel, it wasn't a royal ceremony. It was a quiet disposal. No statues, no golden tomb, just a simple slab of stone over the man who once defied the Pope. Centuries later, when the crypt was opened, his coffin lay broken beside that of Jane Seymour, the only wife he claimed to love. Even in death, she was trapped beside the monster who destroyed her. The irony was perfect. The tyrant buried beside the woman he murdered with love. Historians would later polish his image, the bold reformer, the father of modern England. But beneath the myth lies the truth. He was a man consumed by power, disease, and fear. His own flesh betrayed him as completely as his conscience had. The monster and the maker of England, one scholar wrote. The man who tore his country from the Pope couldn't save his own soul. His empire lived on, but Henry VIII died as he lived, surrounded by screams, stench, and sin. Centuries later, scientists finally uncovered the truth behind the monster. Studies from the University of York revealed he likely suffered from type 2 diabetes and Cushing's syndrome, conditions that caused his massive weight, ulcers, and uncontrollable rage. His own body chemistry destroyed him from the inside. Modern historians even suggest repeated jousting injuries may have damaged his brain, turning paranoia into madness. Henry wasn't just evil, he was literally rotting alive, and the empire that feared him was watching its king become a walking corpse. But the church saw it differently. Priests wrote that Henry's body fell as his soul did. To them, his sickness was divine punishment for burning monasteries, killing priests, and creating his own church just to divorce his wives. The man who demanded worship had become a warning proof that power, without mercy, ends in ruin. Even now, the floor beneath St. George's Chapel where he lies has sunk slightly. Some say it's because his coffin keeps collapsing. Others whisper the earth still doesn't want him. Tourists visit his tomb today and take smiling photos, never realizing they're standing over a man who executed tens of thousands of his own people. Beneath their feet lies a symbol of absolute power and absolute decay. Guides mention his 6 wives, his battles, his palaces, but not the stench that once filled them, not the maggots, not the screams that echoed through the night. History turned the horror into a fairy tale, but the stones remember. They always do. Every empire has its Henry men who believe they are untouchable, chosen by God, beyond decay. Yet they all end the same way, begging for air, surrounded by silence, forgotten by the faith they mocked. Henry VIII wanted immortality. Instead, he became the perfect warning how power can consume even kings. His crown rotted with him, his kingdom healed, but his soul never did. "I am England," he said. He was right, and England almost died with him. So when you picture King Henry VIII, the proud, fat king in portraits, remember what they never show: the smell, the fear, the slow rot. His story isn't one of glory, it's a story of warning. A man who built his own church, murdered his own wives, and was finally eaten by his own flesh. His legacy still stands not in marble, but in the shadow of what power becomes when it forgets it's mortal. The king who feared no man couldn't escape himself.